This is DCF on the Air, and I'm Jason Bukowski. Last month, we talked about an aspect of the Department of Children and Families that I don't know that everyone knew so much about, our Office of Education. And the fact that this office was a part of the department really from the start of the department. Today, we're talking about another program that goes back beyond the start of the department. It's actually been a part of our child protection work going back decades. But again, I don't know that it's as familiar to people, and we really want to shine the light on this, and that's our adoption registry. So joining me today are three experts, and I'll turn it over to them to introduce themselves, and we'll talk a little bit about this program and what it means for New Jersey residents. So turning it over.
Melissa Thomas. I am an adoption registry coordinator.
Hello, my name is Lori Berry. I'm a licensed social worker and the program manager over the adoption registry and covering assistant director of Office of Adoption Operations.
I'm Karima Harris Baker. I am a program manager over field support from the Office of Adoption Operations.
Great. Welcome to DCF on the Air.
Thank you.
So as we start off, I wanted to ask, because I kind of alluded to this in my intro, but when exactly did New Jersey adopt a registry for adoptees? So
as many people know, adoptions historically have had closed records. At least in New Jersey, since 1940s, adoption records were sealed. And then in 1977, there was a state court decision that indicated that the psychological need to know was a good cause to release information to adoptees. And that is what initiated the adoption registry under, at that time, what is our predecessor for the Division of Child Protection and Permanency. So we've been running since 1977.
So was that DIFAS at that point? Because I know that we do.
I believe so. I think we were DIFAS in 1977. It might have even been prior to DIFAS.
Pre-DIFAS. So that's like prehistory at this point.
So we've been around for a while.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about the process when someone signs up for the adoption registry. What does that look like? What can individuals expect from this process?
Yes. So the process, it is quite a lengthy process. So thank you for asking that question. So the process begins with just a simple phone call, email. It can be the adoptee. It can be the birth family. And then from there, we would have to verify that the adoption actually occurred, and the verification is over several different databases. As Lori mentioned, from the 1970s, we've really evolved. So many different databases. We are responsible for some private agency adoptions. So after verification, we move towards an application. Once the application is completed and returned to us with identification of the person, we move forward with a summary and a search. So that's basically about how that process looks. And unfortunately, if a search can't be done, if we don't move to the point of reunification or a search, what we like to do is encourage families to send in letters, pictures, cards, anything to just kind of give the adoptee a sense of belonging.
Yeah. And as Lori mentioned in the intro that she gave on this program, it's this is a mechanism for adoptees in New Jersey to get information about their birth family. And, the real focus is around that psychological need for belonging, that sense of identity that comes from getting some information, whatever information is available, that points you to your biological family. But I think that when we talk about the adoption registry, I think the success story is not always it can't happen for everybody, obviously, but the success story is family reaches out or individual reaches out and they're connected to family they didn't know they had. What kind of percentage of cases do we see where that's actually the end result, that we're actually able to connect people to a biological family member?
Yes. So in my experience, I have been successful with reuniting at least 50% of adoptees.
Wow, 50%. That's a huge number. I mean, when we think about this in the context of the work that we do as a system to keep families together, to keep them intact, and also to reunify if an out-of-home placement is required. Now, in this case, this is an adoption. This family bond has been, new family bonds have been created through adoption. It really is a beautiful thing, but old bonds are severed. Now, in this case, you're saying 50% of people that have reached out to you, you were able to connect them to a biological family member.
Yes. So, I mean, the reunification process, it's not, although 50% do reunite, it's not necessarily always so tight and cohesive, right? Mm-hmm. There are layers of trauma that are re-exposed. Sometimes the connection may just basically be, I have my story. I heard it from you, right? Yeah. And then in some circumstances, it's they're coming together for holidays, birthdays. They're actually hearing the story, and unfortunately, sometimes there's a lot of work around that cohesiveness.
Yeah. No, I think it's not always a relationship, but sometimes just knowing somebody else is out there. Mm-hmm. That can be powerful to people as they sort of process their own sense of identity, sense of self.
I'll also add that part of the adoption registry connections, it's not just for adoptees. We can not just connect with parents, but it could also be other siblings. So kind of in connection with the Sibling Bill of Rights that was recently passed, for adult adoptees, they can reach out and get our assistance as well to make those connections with siblings that they've lost contact with because of the adoption that has occurred.
Do you get a sense, are individuals that have been adopted reaching out, or are birth families or birth parents reaching out? Is it a little combination of both? And then this idea of also siblings reaching out to find out information as well?
So it is a combination of both. However, definitely more birth families than adoptees.
Really?
And that could be for many reasons. The most obvious is because, there's more birth family and there's one adoptee. Mm. Secondly, a lot of adoptees don't necessarily know that they were adopted.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that does sort of reframe our understanding of it, because I think typically when we think about this search for identity, it is done within the context of the individual seeking information about where they came from. But this idea of the individual being a part of, my child is part of my story, and being able to reconnect that and to, bring in my whole identity back and have those relationships, if that's at all possible. I think that's also a real factor here when we're considering the importance of the adoption registry here in New Jersey.
Certainly. I think to your point too, Jason, I think two things can exist, right? Gratitude and grief. Grief or a longing to know where your family of origin is from, how you're connected, but then gratitude to the family that actually steps up to parent you, right? And to create lifelong connections for you. So the both can exist, which is why access to this information is so important as well.
Yeah. let's talk a little bit about the information that's available through the adoption registry, because I think we want to, for individuals that are first hearing about this for the first time, we want to set some expectations around what is available, what information can they get access to. So let's talk a little bit about that. What can they expect to see through an adoption registry inquiry?
Yes, so an adoptee can expect to have a summary, right? And that summary will be non-identifying information. When I say non-identifying information, no names, no dates of birth, no exact locations, and that's just a way to kind of protect the family confidentiality reasons.
Sure.
But what you will get as the adoptee is your story, right? Who are you? How did you come into care? And some things like, depending on what the original record has, we can give information about your mom's hobbies, what she liked to do, where did she work, some information around the family, right? Where they're from, their origins, right? So those things we know, again, are really, really big pieces to putting the puzzle together when you are an adoptee.
Yeah.
Secondly, an adoptee can expect to, after the summary, of course, they could expect a search. We can't guarantee what the search will look like because we just don't know if there will be a reunion or not. And most importantly, we don't know if the person that we're looking for, mom, dad, brother, sister, are interested in a connection. And if they're not, then that's something that you have to kind of expect and kind of, while going through the process, really ask the hard question, what are my expectations? What am I looking to get out of this?
Yeah. I think it's important to note that there are no guarantees here, because New Jersey, in the 1940s, we adopted this closed adoption model. We do have to stand by our promise to the families at that time that, this was a closed adoption. Now, that said, and we were talking a little bit before we started rolling tape on this, but this idea of, evolving our understanding, and when you know better, you do better. It's sort of the, unspoken, it's spoken quite a bit, mantra of our department is as we start to realize like what this means for families, what this means for individuals, we adapt and adopt new policies, new processes. So this idea of, we're still in this transition phase of getting from where we were as a system in the 1940s to where we'd like to go as a system in the 21st century. So I think that's important that when we start to have this conversation, there are no guarantees in this work, except that we can guarantee that our agency will work as hard as we can to try and get you as much information as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, too, that sometimes this happens over years. So when the adoption registry staff reaches out, like they're doing the searches, they reach out, they send a letter asking if somebody's interested in connecting, or if they are the person that we think they are based on the record that we have and a willingness to connect. Sometimes they might not respond right away because they might not be in a place emotionally, psychologically, that they're ready to open that door to that history for themselves. And then we might hear back from them 6 months later, a year and a half later. It varies. So this is something that, we work at the speed that all of the family members involved are, working at. So we're not forcing anything, and it's just letting people reach out at, when they're ready to do it.
Yeah, and it's unpacking a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's, in some cases, if we're dealing with birth families reaching out for adoptees, they didn't know they were adopted.
Mm-hmm.
So unpacking all of that and what that means for your identity before you get to a place where you can emotionally safely reach out and make those connections. So yeah, I fully get that.
I would also just clarify for families who have somebody who has been adopted, we can't do searches for them. They can register with us and provide their information and contact information. So if and when the adoptee comes forward, it's not going to take us as long to locate them, but we can't do searches on their behalf.
Yeah, so we're not reaching out to find the adoptee. We're reaching out on behalf of the adoptee to the family that we've already registered into our registry.
Right. And we will reach out to families who have birth families on behalf of adoptees. We can't force them to respond to us, but we will reach out. But we do not do searches for adoptive or birth families for their adoptive.
Got it. So I mentioned about sort of this evolution of our understanding of this work and how this process has sort of evolved from where we were in the 40s to where we were in the 70s to in 2017, and Karima, thank you for reminding me that date, we in New Jersey adopted, I keep using adopted as a transitive verb. In this case, it's appropriate, but legislation was signed into law that allowed for open birth certificates around adoptions. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how that plays into the work of the adoption registry. How are we incorporating open adoption or not open adoptions, but unsealed birth certificates? Mm-hmm. How are we incorporating that into the work that we do to provide individuals a sense of belonging and identity?
So I think while the registry doesn't provide the birth certificate directly, we will refer the adoptee who's requesting the certificate to the Bureau of Vital Statistics to obtain the information. And again, that speaks to an adoptee's desire to know where they come from, their birthplace of origin. There's valuable information just on an original birth certificate that some adoptees will never have access to had they not requested the document. So it's important to know where I was born, what city I was born in, maybe some information about birth parents. That's important information to have.
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm thinking about the adoption registry here in New Jersey, I'm wondering specifically because we do have a wider audience than just New Jersey residents for this podcast. Mm-hmm. Are there other programs like this in other jurisdictions, or are other jurisdictions looking at concepts like open adoption or unsealed birth certificates to provide that sense of identity for individuals who've been adopted?
Yeah, so federal legislation requires that states have a mechanism in place for birth mothers and putative fathers to access information. So currently there's a little over 20 states that have functioning adoption registries. Some are operated by their state child welfare agencies. Others are facilitated by private agencies. Some have fees associated. Some don't have fees associated. New Jersey's program is free of charge and facilitated by our department. There are also at least 25 other states that have open contact agreements between birth parents and adoptive parents that are regulated and overseen by the courts if it's in the best interest of the child. So those are our open adoption states, right? So while New Jersey doesn't facilitate open adoptions, we realize the value in adoptees having birth information and remaining in contact with birth families. So prior to, I think you mentioned before, the 70s, even long before, when we had folks who were adopted through private agencies or internationally adopted, they weren't privy to this information. The only way you could access it is if you made contact with a birth relative, right? So we're learning that as an agency or as someone who is the holder of information, the value of sharing what we have with adoptees who are wanting to discover more about themselves.
Yeah. Lori, you started to address this early on about the psychological values of, having this sense of identity, having this sense of belonging. What is the value add for the Department of Children and Families or a child welfare system in facilitating this information sharing for individuals?
So I think, at least for New Jersey, it aligns with our core approaches and our strategic plan of recognizing that the family voice is important. And part of the family voice for adoptees is their birth family, like understanding that story, right? Also being healing centered. And adoption is a trauma, no matter what time, when it, and how it happens in a child's life. It is a traumatic experience, and it's a trauma that's felt by every part of the adoptive triad, which includes the birth family, adoptive family, and the adoptee. And just acknowledging that and working towards helping address those traumas and experiences. It also supports kinship connections and either preserving or, bringing them back together, because having those connections to your family is so important to understanding yourself. I mean, for a lot of adoptees, when you look at your family, you don't have anybody that looks like you. You don't know what that experience might be like to have somebody that, you got this from your grandmother and this from your father, and having that connection really provides somebody who's an adoptee that understanding of who they are on a more, on a deeper level. And also for adoptees, we know that they experience loss, grief. A lot of adoptees through child protection agencies experience shame or feeling of guilt around their story. If they don't understand why they were removed or what happened, they might place blame on themselves for some of that. Yeah. And hearing the story, getting that information from the registry about that summary and actually talking to family can help heal some of those wounds that, you might pick up on something as a 5-year-old that, as an adult, being able to understand it from an adult perspective is really vital and important. So we're really trying to be understanding that information and supporting those connections. And that's something that's really part of what, the safe, healthy, and connected that is really all about New Jersey's child protection.
Yeah. When I think about it from a systems perspective, and Karima, I think you said two things can be true. Mm-hmm. And this has been sort of, peek behind the curtain a little bit. When we have November, we celebrate Adoption Month and National Adoption Month. And I'm always really mindful as I'm talking to the commissioner about the messaging that we put out there, that we acknowledge that the process of adoption is a beautiful thing for that adoptive family. And it's a traumatic thing for that biological family. It's the adding of family bonds and it's the severing of family bonds at the same time. And when I think about the adoption registry, it's really around how do we reconcile these two truths and not just look at the glossy outer part, this idea of, we've created a new family. Thank goodness. Now, as a system, we've created this new family. We've also separated a family. Mm-hmm. And, being able to acknowledge that, being able to understand that, and recognize that there's trauma in that, and then work to heal that trauma. And I think that's what the adoption registry is doing. It's really fulfilling that reconciliation of, the individual's full experience with the Department of Children and Families.
Yeah. I think to your point, too, as we grow, we're understanding adoption as a continuum and not as an event, right? So the finalization is just one stop on the journey. An adoptee has to go through these experiences for the rest of the duration of their life, right? And you never know what circumstance in life is going to bring something to fruition. Yeah. For some, it's when they have children of their own. For others, when they get married. There are different periods in an adoptee's life that brings up a plethora of different emotions that sometimes information can help bring a little solace to. It may not fix it, but the fact that I have this information to use as a point of reference may help me through the situation I'm in currently.
Yeah. No, and I think it's even, those milestone moments when you reflect on where I came from. But it can even be the small things too. It can be sitting around the dinner table and everyone's enjoying grandma's meatball recipe, and you're like, I just don't like this. I don't know why everyone else thinks this is great, and what's different with me. And maybe you have just different tastes, or it could be those small moments too. And I think acknowledging that it is a larger continuum of experiences and what that means for the person throughout the span of their lifetime. I think it's an important acknowledgement.
And I'd also say that adoption severs legal bonds and creates new legal bonds, but that doesn't mean that there's not a psychological bond that still exists as well. And I think Adoption Registry helps, recognizes that, because that's something, that's, if for nothing else, you have that DNA connection, and so recognizing that, that bond is always there, even if it hasn't been, there hasn't been contact in an extended period of time. And even if that's from birth, there's still something there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we talked a little bit about this, and Melissa, you had mentioned that, the concern is that, as we publicize this through this podcast, because we have such a wide audience, that we run the risk of flooding the phones. And I assure you it's probably not the case. As much as I do appreciate our audience. I definitely appreciate our audience. But thinking about, just the effort to get the word out, because I think that's important, right? This exists and is successful only as far as people know about it. So beyond this podcast, which is reaching potentially millions, what are we doing to get the word out about the Adoption Registry?
So an adoptee or a birth family can contact us over phone. We do have an email. We do have a website. But most importantly, it's really word of mouth. From my experience, one connection leads to another connection and another. Most adopted persons, once they have a connection, have formed a connection with their family, and if it was a great story, they're really excited and they're sharing it among the adoption community. And then before you know it, someone else is calling saying, you help so-and-so with this. What can you do for me? How can you help me? So, and again, that's why we're here. The hope is that more people will understand and recognize what we do to help that process along.
Yeah.
Can I add to that as well? So we are also required to have these discussions with our pre-adoptive parents prior to finalization. So before, as an agency, we consent to any finalization happening. We share the literature with pre-adoptive parents. We let them know where they can go to register, who they can contact, and they sign receipts stating that they were aware of the information as well. So this is a part of our ongoing process internally to make sure our pre-adoptive parents are aware that the registry exists.
Now, prior to finalization, are we also getting information from the family? Letters, photos, if they're amenable at that point to share with the adoptees if they reach out?
Yeah, if they're amenable and they're willing to, but again, since we're not a open adoption state, there's no way to
Can't require
folks to participate in that way.
Yeah.
I'll also add that we're currently in communication with New Jersey's DCF Youth Council about also adding a post to the New Jersey Youth Resource Spot webpage about the Adoption Registry, so that young adults generally, but also other people in the community I know go to their webpage frequently to gather information and to figure out where to go. And so, looking at posting there as well as so that they have an understanding that this resource is available, because sometimes, you lose track of that information.
Yeah.
That you get at the adoption finalization, or you remember thinking about it, but finding, doing the research of where and who to contact can be hard to do. So, that's another avenue we're looking into currently.
Yeah. And I think that's a great connection. The njyrs.org is a website that really it's created by youth for youth. Mm. So if you're reaching out to them, I'm sure that they're going to be really thoughtful, and then they'll bring it back to communications and we'll review, but it's their words. So, it's how do I access help navigating the system, but from the youth perspective. So I think I'm hoping that will be really beneficial to the registry.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thinking a little bit ahead, what do we see as sort of the next steps? I think the theme here has really been evolution, right? Evolution as a system, evolution of our understanding of what adoption means for individuals. Where would you like to see this evolve to where we can support more individuals, on their adoption journey, gain information about their sense of identity? And I'm going to pose that to each of you.
Yes. So I would like to see more supports around adoption, support groups for families once they do connect. And also possibly expanding searches and summaries to siblings.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things we have right now, so we do have access to therapeutic services for adoptees, even post-adoption, up until the age of 21. But like we've said in this conversation, oftentimes individuals who reach out to the registry are well over 21. I mean, I know we haven't said it before specifically, but, the age range for adoptees that have reached out can go from like adoptive parents for a 5-year-old all the way up to somebody in their 70s or beyond, potentially trying to get information. But for those adults who are reaching out as adoptees, we don't really have access to services to support them through that process. I mean, our staff can help as much as they can in the conversations they have, but sometimes, like we've said, it can open wounds and traumas, and sometimes they need actual therapeutic support. So ways to reach out, and have connection to services like that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, I think to the points made, I would love to see additional support post-reunification as well. Because it can be complex now for an adoptee to try and merge birth relationships with the relationships with the adoptive family. That takes work, a lot of internal work. So I think equipping adoptees and all family members with tools to effectively do that as they reestablish their lives together. Also, I would love for New Jersey to explore becoming an open adoption state where sharing birth information is the standard, and having relationships between birth families and adoptive families is a regular course of the day. This is just how we do things, because we realize the benefit of keeping adoptees connected to their families of origin.
Yeah.
And while we, the work that we do with our staff is very much about supporting connections prior to adoption finalization. Currently, the way the system works, once that adoption occurs, there's no longer any avenue to maintain those connections currently. But it would be, really, I think, beneficial and in the best interest of most adoptees to have those connections through open adoption.
Yeah. I mean, it's creating new norms, right? New expectations for what this process looks like. Yeah.
Certainly.
Well, thank you, all three of you, so much for joining and sharing the information that you have, the wealth of information about the adoption registry. And, the theme of this episode really is around connection. What does the adoption registry facilitate in terms of those connections back to biological family? Next month, we're going to be talking about a different level of connection. We're going to be talking about the connection made available through the second floor system, the second floor youth helpline, text line, and now mobile app. So we'll welcome the individuals from the second floor program into our studio and talk a little bit about how youth can be connected to resources that can help them navigate any number of crises or any number of conflicts or just questions they may have in their lives. But whether you're looking for information about biological family as an adoptee, or you're looking for information about navigating the challenges of being a youth in New Jersey, you can get that information by tuning in to this program, this podcast. So on behalf of our producers and the Office of Communications and Public Affairs, this is Jason Bukowski signing off, and tune in next month for more DCF on the Air.